Today, we're diving into one of the most talked about shifts in our industry right now: decentralized content moderation. If you've spent any time in trust and safety, you'll know that moderation models have traditionally been built around centralized control. One company, one set of rules, one enforcement team. But what happens when moderation itself becomes modular, distributed, and open? To help unpack this, I'm joined by someone who's right at the forefront of building what that future might look like. Aaron Rodericks, who leads trust and safety at Bluesky Social. Aaron is a recognised expert in safeguarding online communities. Before joining Bluesky, he co-led trust and safety at Twitter, where he managed threat disruption and election integrity. And before that, spent 13 years in the Canadian Public Service. In this episode, we'll explore what decentralised moderation really means, how it works in practice, and what it could mean for the future of platform governance and user control.
Some of our users, on the other hand, would very much like us to become the enforcement arm, but the whole point of having decentralized content moderation is that you give that choice over to other people. It recognizes that you should have more of a voice in your road safety, and you should be able to go, I do not want this person as part of my experience. That block button should be meaningful and eternally erase them from any interaction I have with them and prevent all that. I don't want that experience further.
The internet wasn't built with safety in mind, but today there's a huge community of online trust and safety experts, not just building the rules, but enforcing them too. I'm Ailish Daly, and this is Trust Issues, insights from the people who keep the internet safe. In each edition, we meet the experts shaping how the world experiences the internet, what's allowed online, what's not, and the future of how platforms will protect people. Let's share knowledge and build a safer internet together.
Aaron, welcome to Trust Issues. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you very much for having me, Ailish.
Well, to kick things off, can you give us the, for anyone still too shy to ask, version of what Bluesky actually is?
So if you rewind back a few years, Twitter was getting a little frustrated with the initial model of running its own show, running its own architecture, et cetera. It thought maybe there's something better out there. Maybe there's a more flexible way to do things and a more flexible architecture. So it reached out to a small team, and it initially tried to pull them in-house to come up with a blue sky way of thinking of how to do this. And their goal was to create a brand new architecture. So this is not the app that you spend your time in, either on Bluesky or what was formerly known as Twitter, but the thing underlying it, in that where does the code sit, who can access it, how is it treated, just rethinking that architecture fundamentally from the ground up. So this little team started to take on that task and tried to come up with this new approach of decentralized architecture, of saying that what if we locked everything open? What if we gave people more control over their data, more spaces? These are the types of questions they were grappling with. And then the sale of the company happened. So this whole approach was designed so that Twitter was going to become the client of this architecture. But instead, what happened is the company that had initially funded the thinking on this architecture decided to go in a different direction. And these the small but mighty team had started designing up this protocol. So the protocol was called the Authenticated Transfer Protocol, but then they were sitting there with this protocol that no one would use. As a result, they went out, they decided, hey, why don't we create a reference app? Why don't we just show people that cool things can happen if you build something on this architecture? It really will give you more control, more capabilities, etc. So then they started, still being a very small team, but trying to build an app at the same time to show the possibilities of this architecture. And so that's largely the story of Bluesky, which is everyone's really focused on the app, but we're a tiny little protocol company that's just trying to show how things are possible, and then using that to enable a broader ecosystem of other people who are creating apps, experiences, sites, etc., all coexisting and are fully interoperable with each other. And we don't have to get too technical, but it's about people having a lot more control over their spaces, experiences online, kind of getting back to their roots, and hopefully in a way helping people rediscover how to enjoy social again.
And then for those who are unfamiliar, what does decentralized content moderation actually mean in the context of Bluesky?
Well, that's pretty straightforward in that you're all very familiar with how centralized content moderation works at this point, in that there is a company that controls the site. They create rules. When you violate the rules, they, take action against you. And then there's no other recourse. There's no other ways to appeal the decisions, etc. People have tried to create alternative solutions like the oversight board, for example, but that still was historically very tightly wrapped into only one company. So decentralized content moderation basically goes, why are we always making decisions at the level of Supreme Court, if you will, for all the decisions on a site? Can we push power downwards more into the hands of users and give them more control over their daily experience? And that's the question we fundamentally are trying to create and are still working to create, which is Bluesky does the underlying layer. We still have to do the baseline content moderation. We don't want anyone to try and take on the really hard tasks, the really difficult ones of taking the worst of the content off the internet. We're going to do that for you. And generally speaking, we keep on adding more and more moderation over time to meet our users' needs for greater safety in their online spaces. But at the end of the day, we recognize that we're going to fail. We recognize that the task of content moderation is an impossible one, and there's no way to make everyone happy. There's no way to conform to everyone's ideas of safety, and there's no way to give people the level of control over the spaces they want while we maintain all the control. So what it initially allows us to do is then users are able to stack different things on top of our baseline. Either they can create their own or they can subscribe to others. But in doing so, they can create their own experience online that much more caters to their sense of what their idea of freedom of speech is, to give them much more range on it, and to filter out the speech, et cetera, that they don't want to engage with online. So in doing so, users can create things like block lists. Hey, I don't want to interact with these accounts for these following reasons. Would anyone else like to subscribe to these lists to either mute or block all these users? So at a fundamental level, you potentially have this on a number of services, but that is a very simple version of it. Getting a little bit more complicated, though, you can also create your own moderation service, and you could do it via an automation, i.e., every account that is under a week old gets this label. Someone does that, and they get this label, so you know who is a new account if you do want to engage with those or you don't. But then fundamentally, there's much more challenging problems of you have communities that want higher levels of moderation, which is fantastic. That is exactly the problem that we're trying to solve here. So you have networks like Bluesky, for example. They want greater safety for the Black community. That is great. We are never going to be able to create the level of context-specific moderation that meets every single community out there. So the Black community can go out there and run their own labeling service that issues labels, and anyone who subscribes to that labeling service then gets those verdicts. So it's very much opt-in. No one else sees those verdicts, but if you're interested in it, you subscribe, you get the verdicts back, and then that's part of your moderation experience. Probably I'll stop there, but that gives you a pretty wide idea of how there's a lot more control.
It's a very clear explanation. And, I think that the idea of like moderation that can be actually modular is a bit of a mindset shift. And it's a big departure from how many of us in trust and safety were trained to think, that consistency and central control were always the goal. Thinking a little bit deeper on decentralized moderation, what are the main advantages of decentralizing moderation? And conversely, what are the biggest challenges or risks compared to traditional systems?
I'm still waiting to see any of those advantages come to light, because from a centralized perspective, doing content moderation from a decentralized approach is only going to get harder. You have so much at your disposal, whether you were at a small player like myself at Twitter formerly, or you're at the big guns like TikTok or YouTube or Facebook or slash Meta. Usually what happens in these spaces is that the bigger you get, the more centralized your architecture, the more data you're sucking in, usually linking to serving some type of targeted advertising. So it all creates a model where in trust and safety, you have this deep hunger to answer all your problems with data. The more data you suck in, the more you're able to answer, the more ideally safety you can give to your users. That all kind of changes with decentralized moderation because decentralized moderation generally doesn't happen on these big architectures. And as a result, users can be in their own spaces. They can control their own data. They have, so all the advantages are with the users on this one, since they can control their own spaces, create their own little sub-communities, moderate those spaces the way they prefer, to much higher standards of safety than we have at the baseline at Bluesky. So as a whole, it's significantly harder. You get a lot less data, especially being in a decentralized space. You're always factoring things like privacy. Ideally, you have to balance demands from regulatory agencies. You have to balance law enforcement requests. We collect very minimal data, but as a result, I don't know things like gender when making a decision. And people expect you to have that context always factored in. There's always, I say trust and safety is a mixture of impossible requirements from users. It just makes all of those much harder when people want you to make immediate and perfect decisions with perfect context every single time, and you don't collect any of that data to make those decisions. So hopefully I told you all the disadvantages, but the advantages really sit with the users, and
Yeah,
they
no,
get significantly more control.
I love how you frame that. And yeah, it does sound like the same qualities that make decentralization really appealing to users are also what make it very complex to manage. When you think of Bluesky allowing different moderation services or labelers to coexist, can you explain to folks how that ecosystem works and who decides which labels apply and to which content?
The labeling experience at this point is still very rough. I'm very impressed and amazed by people who have set up successful labelers because they're doing incredible work, and we need to do a lot more to make this whole experience more robust. And as the company grows, and we just hit 30 people this week. So, we're a very tiny company, and there's always a new burning fire to work on. So labelers have definitely not gotten the love in our level of support that we need to do to make it much more robust. But that being said, we're extremely hands-off with labelers. Overall, from a centralized perspective, I wrote up a very short list of rules you have to follow as a labeler. Basically, be transparent about the decisions you make. If you take appeals, take those appeals and answer them. And moving forward, we hope to do a lot more with labelers, which is allowing people to provide context on why you made that decision, et cetera. That too will come with time. But fundamentally, if you want to set on this journey of being a labeler, you have to decide to set up a moderation service and a labeling service, which allows you to apply labels to content. And that in and of itself is a hard challenge already, because it means that unlike something like a Reddit or a subreddit, you're only moderating things in an individual group. But instead, this is a microblog with almost 40 billion users, 40 million users. Hopefully I use the right variation, 40 million users. And so there's just a sea of opinions, et cetera. So depending on what type of content you're intending to moderate, and I do recommend you keep it as narrow as possible, it gives you just a tremendous amount of data and work to accomplish. Mm-hmm. So there are different types of labelers. One very targeted labeler that I found was interesting, for example, looks up people within the UK at least, and it looked up the private schools they attended and tagged, UK public figures with the private schools and the annual fees. I thought that was an interesting one. I'm still of mixed emotions in allowing it, but technically it complies with the rules. And, those who find it useful, great. One that I find more interesting would be uh, one of our users created a screenshot labeler. They said, hey, if I want to be on Bluesky, I want to be on Bluesky. I don't want to spend my time looking at screenshots from other services. So she set up a screenshot labeler to label all the screenshots from other services. And just, if you so choose, you can just hide them from your experience in a labeler. And you can just be on Bluesky without ever having to see what's going on in the other spaces. One thing that I should add is that when a labeler creates a label, they just choose to issue a set of labels. They can choose to issue whatever sets of labels they would like. So Black Sky issues a label called misogynoir. So they are looking specifically for behavior targeted at the Black community, which can take much deeper context than we're able to take in with 100 plus moderators scattered around the world. And they're able to apply that to a label. Then you as a user have the option, hey, if I encounter that label, I have three options. I can either just automatically hide that content so I never see it. I can have a label on it so that it gives me a warning. So I will see that content associated with the user or the specific piece of media, et cetera. It'll have the label that says misogynoir. And then I can choose, hey, do I want to interact or not with that? But I know Black Sky has taken care of it. They've already stuck a label on it. I can choose not to engage. It's a trap. And then finally, you can choose to say, look, I don't trust that specific label, because maybe the service offers 10 different labels. You can choose 8 of them and ignore 2 of them and say, no, I'd like that off. I want that part of my experience. So you can do that for Bluesky's labels. We offer a huge range of labels. And you can do it for any of these third-party labels as well.
When you're looking at labels that are presented, what rules are you applying to what is allowed and what isn't allowed as a label? Are there certain things that just are simply a no-go?
Oh, of course. In fact, when the very first version of labelers was proposed, the immediate thoughts that crossed my mind were all the different ways that could go wrong. And to be honest, I think to date only taken down 2 labelers intentionally after investigation. So for the most part, it's just a huge number of people engaging in good faith with the investment that it takes to set these up. So for example, what are the no-go territories? I would have to pull up the rules that I wrote for labelers, but it's pretty straightforward. If you, for example, are using labels to harass individuals, then that's obviously a no-go. A second one is if you are calling out protected characteristics. So if you're calling out people's age or their race or things like that, and it's, specifically with malicious intent, we remove that. I don't care if someone's labeling you as a Bluesky elder. I don't think it's made for malicious intent. But on the other hand, if you are calling out someone's religion and labeling people as such, you're gone. And that's exactly what happened in the 2 cases that I removed. It was the same labeler that came back and they were no longer welcome on Bluesky. But other than that, as long as you abide by the rules, which is you are doing this to make a safer space in addition to what Bluesky offers to users, we take you as operating in good faith, and we usually don't dig into the details. Some of our users, on the other hand, would very much like us to become the enforcement arm, but the whole point of having decentralized content moderation is that you give that choice over to other people. So some of our users really want us to control every label. They want us to be the Supreme Court, and perhaps maybe we'll get to that one day. But right now, we're just simply too small, like I said, with 30 people, that we are going to get into going, oh, did you apply that label fairly to that person? Basically, if you're operating in good faith, I stay out of it.
That's so interesting. And look, it feels like this really could democratize moderation. But I have to ask, are there some questions then around trust and authority? There is this kind of hands-off approach, but so who decides what's safe or what's true in a system like that?
Well, the question is, how do you decide in your day-to-day life? In your day-to-day life, you may decide decisions that are right for you and your family. But then the city will make decisions for what's right for you on the roads. Law enforcement goes, for what's crimes, and then you have it at the national state. So I think the whole point of having it decentralized is the fact that it's distributed. It recognizes that you should have more of a voice in your road safety, and you should be able to go, I do not want this person as part of my experience. That block button should be meaningful and eternally erase them from any interaction I have with them and prevent all that. I don't want that experience further, or that I really trust my neighborhood, my community, and they have a perspective that aligns with my values. So I'm going to opt in to give them a voice over my safety. Fundamentally, at the end of the day, we still, no matter which country we live in, have usual expectations of safety and security at the state level. And Bluesky would offer a similar level of, we're trying to give you the baseline. We're trying to keep the extremist content, the really bad stuff away from you. And we're trying to make a lot of decisions in other areas, but the goal was never for us to be the be all and end all. And really, if we attempt to pursue that, if you try to say, you know what, I'm never going to take care of any of my safety. I'm never going to lock my doors. I'm going to walk out of the house. I'll never lock my car or anything like that because Bluesky is responsible for me. That's kind of, unfortunately, the immature state of patriarchal safety that we're kind of stuck in. We're just used to yelling at the gatekeepers to say, like, you're responsible for my safety, but not taking any responsibility on for yourself. So in this way, we're trying to give you the power, but we're also trying to say, hey, part of taking on that power is taking on responsibilities should you so choose. And if you don't want to, that's fine. We offer you the baseline, but it's only going to be X amount of it.
I love how you frame that as both, freedom and also responsibility for oneself. I think that's great. From a trust and safety perspective then, how do you maintain consistent standards across a network that's essentially designed to be fragmented or customizable? Is there a bog standard?
I mean, yes and no, you do and you don't. So at least on AT Proto or the Authenticated Transfer Protocol, we don't, for the most part. We have our developer standards, but if you create your own separate app in which you're running your own data and you're keeping your own servers, that's your own space. We can't take on control of all of these, and the attempt is not to do so. But then there's other ones like Skylight, for example. So Skylight is a video sharing app that would be similar to TikTok. So Skylight, for example, ingests content that comes directly from Bluesky in its own app format. So in their case, they're kind of relying on our infrastructure for their safety and moderation spaces. So there's different variations of it. But basically, what I look at is what's within the range of Bluesky. Those are the parameters that I'm really focused on 95% or more, maybe even 98% of the time, on making that space safer. So when the content comes in, if you're storing your data on a separate server in your own app, it's not really my concern. You're always going to have these separate spaces in decentralized space. When it comes into Bluesky, the app, then we can be far more opinionated on what's allowed and what's not allowed, on what's potentially promoted, deranked. I mean, that's what happens in all other social media spaces. We just have to figure out how to promote or derank content, which we're not there yet.
And who's ultimately accountable when something goes wrong? Because it strikes me that it's a tricky one.
I mean, most of the time it's me. Sometimes I can blame the CEO, but most of the times it's me. But at the end of the day, you're running a social network in many ways like any others. So when something goes wrong, it depends what goes wrong. But usually the answer or the blame is with trust and safety. And then all we can do is learn from the experience and try to improve for the next time.
I was going to comment that, you can't exactly, when it's a decentralized system, that you can't exactly escalate to a single trust and safety lead anymore. But that isn't the case. You are the point of escalation.
Yes, I think, I've learned a lot in the almost 2 years that I've been at Bluesky. And one of the biggest challenges is shifting people's behavior. The the company approached the problem from a very tech utopian perspective of, hey, if we give these people tools, maybe they'll find it interesting and use it. And what's fascinating and amazing and awesome is a number of people took up those tools and then created amazing, awesome things. That is perfect. The vast majority of people aren't interested in having greater responsibility or control over their experience. They just, to take the saying, they would like a single neck to choke. They would like, a single person to yell at, and that person is me. And then there's a subset of those who even refuse to take any type of responsibility, whatever, for the content they see online. So they're locked in this gatekeeper mindset. They're used to being in the walled garden with the pruned trees, the millions or billions in income and expenditures. So they have the same expectations. So they're very much, if anything happens to me that hurts my feelings, it's Aaron's fault. And, I'm never going to fix or be able to address those people, but those are users nonetheless.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Aaron, I hope you don't get given out to too much, or I hope you don't get yelled at too much this week. Sometimes I hear people talk about a concern that decentralization could create moderation shopping, where the bad actors move around to the least restrictive spaces. Is there a way that you can prevent that without re-centralizing control?
Yes and no. I'm trying not to get too technical in this description because I'm both non-technical and unqualified for that, but B, it also gets a little dense. So, but here's a very specific example. So when you get into child safety, for example, in Bluesky, the way we are shifting to, and hopefully this will be done in the next month, is every time we take down content for a specific reason, the goal of where we're going to be is that we will just attach a label to it. So that content may be still available at the API at lower levels, but you will just see that we've taken it down in our app. And this makes some researchers very happy because it means that if content is largely legal, other services, other third parties can learn from that content and, train their systems or improve their own moderation off of that. So it's one of these decisions that should improve the whole ecosystem. But when you get into certain areas like child safety, it's too risky to leave certain types of content on your site, even in a label taken down in the app. But there could be malicious actors that are trying to recover that content and share it into restricted spaces. So in those cases, even though we're decentralized, we burn it down, all of the layers, down to the relay level, which is kind of the architecture, or like the piping of the internet, if you will. So we burn it all the way down only for that type of content. But in all other cases, we're trying to move it so that we're just really opinionated and we issue a takedown label. But what this means is that indeed people can go into their own spaces and exchange the type of content that we do not approve of, and that's against the Bluesky community guidelines. That's fine. That's a state of, the internet, that people will create spaces using various tools that may be in opposition to you from a values perspective. If you look in Mastodon, for example, Mastodon has created the ability to set up your own servers, your own infrastructure, and then they connect to each other. So you can choose who and when you speak to someone else. So now the Truth Social app just took the Mastodon code and used their own variation of it. Similar to Gab as well, I think they did the same thing. So both of those are using the same underlying code. But what happens with Mastodon and what happens with Bluesky as well, that we really haven't had to do it as yet, is you can say, fine, we believe in open source, we believe in the code being free and for anyone to reuse it, but you're using it in a way that doesn't align with our values, so we're going to cut off any interactions between us and yourselves. So we haven't had this particularly happen except with really small little bad actors try to create spamming services. But over time, you're going to get larger apps, larger ecosystems, and you're going to have breaks in terms of values. And what really happens in terms of decentralization is what you will have seen in terms of Mastodon, which is called, I think it's called defederation, where you choose no longer to interact with other servers or users from those servers and say, this is our space, this is your space. We can't control what you say, but it won't be shared anywhere here.
That's really interesting how you all are thinking that through. When it comes then to the level of control or transparency that the model gives to users, how much can they shape their own online experience? And you've touched on this earlier, and I hate to ask you to repeat it, but I think it's something that really people are, again, a shift in mindset as to how this actually manifests.
Right now, part of the challenge is we're still a very small company with a tiny team. So, a lot of positive intent needs to be kind of sent our way to connect the dots in between the vision and what we have at the moment. What I've been really impressed by is these few technical people like Rudy from Black Sky and a few others who have gone out and, despite the tooling, the capability, et cetera, have gone and created their own communities, have created their own moderation services, have become these, like even in Canada, I'm trying to remember, I think it's called Gander. They're trying to experiment using the underlying protocol to set up a Canadian-only social media service, which I'm very curious about. I mean, what's it going to be like with people just saying sorry to each other all the time? Not sure.
It would be so friendly. It would be just such a friendly space.
You think, but then the reality is Canada is still fragmenting and becoming more polarized over time. So they're going to find out, but at least the stereotype is always amusing. So what this allows is just an incredible amount of control and transparency for those who are creating these own experiences online. The average user won't necessarily experience that, but the average user isn't necessarily trying for that. They just want to go online. They want to interact with other people, hopefully real people, and have, enjoyable conversations, learn from the experience, et cetera. So in that, we're just trying to give them more control. How can you be subject to less harassment? How can you keep yourself in a small S social bubble instead of being broadcast to the wide internet? But we keep on trying to build that out, but it's a long, laborious process to add all those components in. This goes back to an earlier answer, but part of the challenge is shifting people's mindset, and that people don't necessarily like to go searching for the toggles that give them control. Even if it's like a switch or something like that, they still want you to do it for them. The thing that I am really focused on in trust and safety, and what I've learned in the site, is you can give people all the controls they want, but it doesn't really matter if they don't use them. So it becomes more and more important to have your default experience work for most of the people most of the time. And that means putting in a lot more safety checks than if you are just giving people controls. Because the challenge with giving people that many controls is, to a certain extent, it also means you push responsibility for their safety to them, which, yes, that's part of the framework. But if you are a big account and you have, thousands of people commenting on you every single day, you don't have the time or the space to go through all of those. And how can we make that experience be, comfortable as it is for a small account to be on a day-to-day basis? Overall, we're trying to give much more control and transparency, but we're also trying to make the defaults give you that without changing any of the settings.
And do you see this shifting of power from platforms to users as being a shift of responsibility as well? Some would argue that you're shifting power from platforms to users is actually another way of shifting responsibility. Maybe that's a good thing though, right?
I think it's both. I think it's a complicated space to navigate. Fundamentally, one of the reasons I took the job and have many discussions with my therapist about why I did so, is that you are working in a space where you get to decide the norms of speech on the internet. And that's not a decision that I should ever make. That's not a decision that any individual should make. And unfortunately, that's a reflection of modern day society, that we have a few individuals with an incredible amount of power who are deciding the norms of speech for society writ large. That's a terrible, awful thought. And at Bluesky, we're trying to create a different model where I don't get to decide everything, where users should be involved in that dialogue, And what I'd love to have is more of a participation-oriented model where I'm not just deciding the rules for Bluesky, or that we have something more collaborative where users get to weigh in. But as a result, you can't give power to users without adding more responsibility as part of it. But I think the key thing is to balance that delicately over time. So you're not just transferring them responsibility without power, and you're trying to give them a little balance of both so that they can have a voice in the direction of Bluesky. But if they disagree with that, architecturally, they can walk away, they can go to another app, they can host their own data. They have a lot more control and capability. That architecturally is already built in, but we're trying to, longer term, give them a voice in what happens on this site. And that is going to be a challenge to figure out.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of the implications for the industry, what kinds of new skills or mindsets will trust and safety professionals need to work effectively in a decentralized ecosystem? Like, what have you done in your last 2 years to make you really effective at this, Aaron?
I haven't the slightest idea what I've done to make me effective, but decentralization fundamentally requires you to work with significantly more ambiguity. You will have to make decisions with a fraction of the data that happens or that the big companies have. You will have to make decisions on cases that happen here for the first time, and users will disagree with you vehemently over your call, but you make the best decision you can do in the moment. Fundamentally, the game is the same. You are trying to make users safer to the best of your ability online. You just have a different range of tools and capabilities, which in many ways is a smaller set compared to being at the big centralized players. You have less moderators, you have less tools, you have less resources. So it's basically like doing the trust and safety job, but on extremely hard mode. So for those of you who are out there at startups or really small shops, one-person shops, it would be more similar to that, trying to wear all the hats and put out multiple fires at once experience, than that of having a singular role at a very large organization where you know what your remit is continually and at all times.
Brilliant. And for people then who are outside of TNS, policymakers, journalists, even users, what's the biggest misconception about decentralized moderation?
I think the biggest challenge that people have is that they just make an assumption from day one that you have all the data. So people love to impart negative intent where there isn't any. We often, just from a privacy perspective, don't collect any of the data. And when you see the law enforcement requests that come in asking for all this types of information, I'm very thankful that we don't collect that data, because we don't want to give up that data on users. I don't want to tell them what your real name is, what this information is. I want to keep this a privacy-oriented platform where you only have to give us very basic information in order to participate on the internet. But I think that there is this misconception that we know everything about you because we are an internet company. We have collected every single bit of information, for your online habits for the past couple of years. And we have, this giant one. And then we deliberately choose, because of this identity element, we have taken a decision. No, we took the action because on a low context read of what you put out, whether it was a movie quote or a death threat, we presumed that it was a violation, and then we took action on it. We never had any of that information, and no one has the time to scroll through 10,000 of your last posts to figure out, oh no, you really felt this way about that piece. But I think people are because of the trust deficit that has occurred with a lot of these large scale platforms, people, and the things this society is going through at the moment, people have a great deal of negative intent, which they automatically impart to any of your decisions. And it's just exhausting to continually be out there to be like, well, and argue with each user one by one, and then to have that conversation taken out of context. So there's no winning on this case.
No, I get it. And in a way, do you see decentralized systems helping to erase the resource pressures that many TNS teams face today?
No, not at all. uh, the,
Damn it.
this was never designed to ease the resource pressures per se. It is designed to give users more control over their spaces. What we are doing is we, as a very tiny company that was under 20 people for most of its existence, is we are doing things in a very low resource way, because we started off with a few million in the bank. When I make a decision that reflects those of the Titans, if I go, oh, hey, if for every age verification or something like that, we'll pay $2, well, that's easy. We would just bankrupt the company overnight and call it a day. So frequently, funnily enough, working in international development has trained me in the mindset quite effectively of, you really just can't copy and paste some model that the big guys have taken, because there's just from their infrastructure choices to their servers to their systems. My favorite spam system, that I used to use cost me 20 grand a day to use. I love that system deeply. My wife will not, let her name our daughter after that stuff. That's okay. But I can't make those types of decisions here because they are so costly that you can't run a small startup with that type of burn rate. So I think what you're seeing is correlation. Decentralized systems are frequently associated with small companies that then operate in low resource environments because they're not designed around huge advertising and monetization engines. It's just a reflection of the ecosystem writ large.
Before we wrap up, I want to look forward a bit, and because it feels like we're still in the early chapters of decentralized moderation. So what would success look like for decentralized moderation in 5 years' time? What signs would tell you that it's really working, Aaron?
Yeah, thank you. And I think 5 years is a good threshold because we're about 2 years at least into this journey for me. And you're starting to, I've seen different models of innovation where, you focus on individual things, or there's, the mushroom one, and that they're all, spread out, and then you see what pollinates. Some of them grow larger, but it's a surprise to you. You can't pick your winners in advance. And I think having worked in that innovation ecosystem back in Canada, I'm starting to see it here. You're starting to see little ones come up, some of them go away, but then others, are forming into larger, more substantial ecosystems. So what I'm seeing right now with Black Sky is what I'm hoping to see as a landscape writ large in about 5 years' time, where you have third-party moderation ecosystems that exist at least on Bluesky and in the authenticated transfer protocol that are independent. They are non-reliant on Bluesky for anything if they don't want to. They can rely on the amazing open source tools that we've built using partnerships with organizations like Roost to get out there. But they are self-funded. They have their own rich rules, moderators, ecosystem, and can create, in addition to the space that Bluesky offers, or in their own space, a rich and safe environment for people to discuss. And have their own spaces online, which I believe is the way we're going to in this fragmenting ecosystem. So that's genuinely my hope that we can enable that to happen with this protocol and this ecosystem. And in 5 years' time, I think that's a genuine possibility. Whether or not Bluesky is still around, we want to enable that ecosystem to occur, and it's heading in that direction at least.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. Aaron, thank you so much for sharing your time and your insights today. It's been a fascinating conversation, not just about how decentralized moderation works, but about what it represents. And that's a shift towards transparency, shared accountability, and most importantly, user empowerment in online safety. If you'd like to learn more about Bluesky's model or Aaron's work, we've linked to relevant resources in the show notes. Thanks for listening. And thank you, Aaron, for joining us.
Thanks very much, Amy.
Thanks for tuning in to Trust Issues, brought to you by Web Purify, an InTouch CX company. What are your thoughts on today's conversation? And what do you want to hear about next? Get in touch with us on LinkedIn. We'd love to keep the discussion going. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories, insights, and behind-the-scenes voices from the world of trust and safety.